If you've got a crack running across your driveway, your walkway, or a step out back, a concrete contractor is going to walk up, glance at it for about 10 seconds, and hand you a bill for $200, $300, sometimes more, just to patch one crack. And if that crack has spread, or there's more than one, some of them will tell you the whole slab needs tearing out and repouring, which can run you $3,000 or better. Today, I am going to show you how to fix that crack yourself. The old way, the way it was done on this farm long before anybody had a phone number for a concrete contractor, for the cost of a bag of cement and a bottle of glue. Now, I want to be straight with you before we start, because not every crack is the same, and I would rather you know that up front than find out the hard way. Most cracks you see in a driveway or a sidewalk are what is called a shrinkage or settling crack, and those you can patch yourself, and the patch will hold for years if you do it right. But there is a different kind of crack, one that tells you something more serious is going on underneath, and I am going to show you exactly how to tell the difference. So stay with me for that part, because getting that wrong is the one mistake that actually costs you money. I'm Amos Miller, and out here, we did not call a man out to fix a crack in the barn floor or the porch step. We fixed it ourselves, with what was already sitting in the shed, and I still patch concrete this same way today. So, let's get into it, starting with why that crack showed up in the first place. Concrete cracks for a handful of plain reasons, and knowing which one you are dealing with tells you how to fix it right. The most common one, by far, is the ground underneath moving. Concrete does not bend, so when the dirt beneath a slab swells up in a wet spring and shrinks back down in a dry summer, or freezes and heaves in the winter, the slab has nowhere to go but crack. That is why you will see more cracks out here after a hard winter than any other time of year. The second reason is shrinkage. When a slab is first poured, it is mostly water, and as that water evaporates out over the following weeks, the concrete pulls in on itself, just slightly, and if there is nothing to control where that shrinking happens, it picks its own spot to crack. A contractor who knows his business will cut what is called a control joint, a shallow groove, every so many feet, so the slab has a planned place to crack instead of an ugly one. If your driveway was never cut with those joints, that is often exactly why you have got a crack running clean across it now. And the third reason, plain and simple, is a poor mix to begin with. Too much water thrown into the mix makes it easier to pour, but it makes for a weaker, more brittle slab once it sets, and that kind of slab cracks sooner and more often than one mixed right. Most of what you will patch on an older property is some combination of the first two, ground movement and shrinkage, and that is exactly the kind of crack this fix is built for. Here is everything you need, and I want you to notice, there is nothing on this list you cannot find for under $20 total, even if you own none of it today. A bag of plain Portland cement will run you about $10, and one bag will patch every crack on most properties with plenty left over. A small bag of fine sand, the kind sold for mixing mortar, is another $3 or $4. And if you have got a sandbox or a garden bed on the place, you may already have enough. A bottle of plain white glue, the same glue you would find in any kid's school desk, costs about $3, and that is your bonding agent, which I will explain in a minute. And for tools, a stiff wire brush, an old flathead screwdriver, or a cold chisel, a margin trowel, or even a sturdy putty knife, and a stiff bristle scrub brush. That is the whole list. No mixer, no fancy trowel set, no trip to a specialty masonry supplier. Compare that against what a bag of pre-mixed vinyl concrete patcher costs at the hardware store, which is closer to $10 or $12 for a bag that patches maybe 2 or 3 cracks, and you can see the old way still wins on cost, especially if you have got more than a couple of cracks to see to. And the white glue trick I mentioned, that is not some gimmick I invented. Old-time masons brushed a thinned glue slurry onto old concrete before patching it for the very same reason a modern bag of patcher tells you to use a bonding liquid, because bare new cement laid against old, dry concrete does not want to stick, and that glue gives it something to grab onto. Alright, let's get to it. Step 1 is cleaning that crack out, and do not skip this, because patching over loose material is the single biggest reason a patch job fails inside of a year. Take your wire brush and scrub down inside the crack, pulling out any loose crumbs, old dirt, grass, or gravel that has worked its way in there over time. Follow that with your screwdriver or chisel and rake along the bottom and sides to knock loose anything the brush missed. Then take a shop broom or even just a garden hose on a strong setting, and clear all that debris and dust straight out. A patch will only bond to solid concrete, never to loose dust sitting on top of it. Step 2 is the old mason's trick, and it is the one most homeowners skip because nobody ever showed it to them. Take that same screwdriver or a cold chisel and gently work along the inside edges of the crack, angling it so you are cutting the crack slightly wider at the bottom than it is at the top. What you are doing is called undercutting, and it turns that crack into a shape like a shallow dovetail, wide at the bottom, narrower at the top. Once your patch cures inside a shape like that, it is mechanically locked in place. It cannot pop back out the way a patch, sitting flat on top of a straight-sided crack, eventually will, especially once the ground moves again next winter. That one extra step, maybe 5 minutes of work, is the difference between a patch that lasts 1 season and a patch that lasts 10 years. Step 3, and this is where most people go wrong without ever knowing it. Before you touch that crack with any patching material, wet it down. Take your hose or a spray bottle and dampen the whole crack and a few inches on either side until the old concrete looks dark and wet, but is not standing in a puddle. Here is why that matters. Old, dry concrete is thirsty. If you pack a fresh, wet, cement patch against bone-dry concrete, that old slab will pull the water straight out of your new patch before it has had a chance to properly cure, and a patch that dries out too fast cures weak, chalky, and cracked. Dampening it first stops that. Now, that white glue I told you to buy, mix about 1 part of it with about 4 parts water in a small cup, and brush that mixture into the damp crack, coating the sides and the bottom right before you pack in your patch. That is your bonding slurry. My grandfather did this same thing with a bucket of thinned lime and cement slurry, brushed on with an old paintbrush before he set any patch, out in the barn, long before there was a hardware store within 20 miles of this place. He used to say concrete does not care how good your patch is if it never learned to hold hands with what was already there. He was not a man with a lot of formal schooling, but he understood that bond was the whole job, and everything else was just filling in around it. I still hear him saying it every time I brush that slurry on. Now for the patch itself. In a bucket or a mixing tub, combine 1 part of your Portland cement with about 2.5 parts of your sand. Mix those dry ingredients together first until the color is even all the way through. Then add water a little at a time, mixing as you go, until you have got a stiff paste, about the texture of thick peanut butter. You want it stiff enough that it holds its shape on the trowel and does not slump or run. If it is runny, add a touch more of your dry mix. If it is crumbly and will not hold together, add water, a small splash at a time. Working while that bonding slurry is still tacky and wet, pack your patch mix firmly down into the crack with your margin trowel or putty knife, pressing it in from one end and working steadily to the other. Push it in hard enough to fill the whole width and depth of that undercut you cut earlier, right down to the bottom, and do not just skim material across the top, because that traps air pockets underneath that will crack right back open. Overfill the crack slightly, mounding the patch just a bit above the surrounding surface. That extra material gives you something to work with in the next step, and it is far easier to take a little material away than to come back and add more to a patch that has already started to set. Let that patch sit for about 15 to 20 minutes until it firms up enough that pressing a finger into it leaves only a light mark, not a deep dent. Then take a straight piece of scrap wood or a metal float, lay it flat across the patch, and drag it across in one smooth pass to knock down that mound flush with the surrounding concrete. If you want the surface texture to match, a stiff push broom dragged lightly across the wet patch, the same direction as the broom marks on the rest of the driveway, will blend it right in so it does not stand out like a scar. And now comes the part that separates a patch that lasts from a patch that does not, and it costs you nothing but a little patience. Cover that patch with a sheet of plastic, or lay a damp piece of burlap or an old towel over it, and mist it with water twice a day for the next 3 days. Concrete does not get its strength from drying out fast in the sun. It gets its strength from a slow chemical reaction that needs water the whole time it is happening, and a patch that is allowed to dry out in a single hot afternoon can end up half as strong as one that was kept damp while it cured. My grandfather covered every patch on this place with wet feed sacks for 3 days running, rain or shine, and I have never once seen a crack open back up where he did that. Give it that patience, and that patch will outlast the rest of the driveway around it. Now, everything I just showed you is for a hairline crack, or one about as wide as a pencil. If you have got a wider gap, anything close to half an inch or more, or if it is an expansion joint, that strip you see between sections of a driveway or a sidewalk, that patch mix is the wrong tool, and packing it in solid will crack right back out, because that gap is supposed to move a little as the concrete expands and contracts with the seasons. For a gap like that, you want two things from the hardware store: a length of what is called backer rod, which is just a soft foam rope that comes in different widths, and a tube of polyurethane concrete sealant. Push that foam backer rod down into the gap first, about half an inch below the surface, using a putty knife or even a scrap of wood to press it in evenly along the whole length. Then run a bead of the sealant right on top of it with a caulking gun, and smooth it flush with a wet putty knife or a gloved finger. That backer rod is doing more work than it looks like. Without it, the sealant would stick to the bottom of the gap as well as both sides, and when the concrete shifts, it tears itself apart, trying to stretch in 3 directions at once. With the backer rod underneath, the sealant only bonds to the 2 sides, so it can flex like a rubber band instead of tearing. A length of backer rod and a tube of sealant together will run you about $15 to $20, and it will handle a joint that plain patch mix never could. Now, here is the part I promised you at the start, and I want you to hear it plainly, because I would rather you hear it from me than pay for a patch that was never going to fix the real problem. Everything I have shown you today is right for an ordinary settling or shrinkage crack, but there are a few signs that tell you a crack is not just cosmetic, and no amount of cement and glue is going to fix it. If a crack is wider than about half an inch, and it has visibly grown in the last few months, that is worth paying attention to. If you see a crack where one side of the concrete sits noticeably higher than the other, even by a small step you can feel with your foot, that usually means the ground underneath is settling unevenly, not just shrinking. And if you see a crack in a foundation wall that runs in a stair-step pattern along the mortar lines of block or brick, rather than a straight line through solid concrete, that is a classic sign of foundation movement. Any of those, and the honest thing to do is call a structural engineer or a foundation specialist for an evaluation, not a general concrete contractor, and definitely not a bag of patch mix. That inspection usually costs a few $100s, and it is money well spent, because patching over a foundation problem does not fix it, it just hides it from view while it keeps getting worse underneath. I would rather tell you that plainly now than have you find out the expensive way later. Now, before I let you go, here is one more thing, and almost nobody who patches their own driveway ever gets around to doing it, even though it costs about $15 for the whole slab, not just the one crack. Once you have patched every crack on the property, take a penetrating concrete sealer, the kind sold in a jug at any hardware store, and coat the whole driveway with it, not just the patches. Remember back at the start, when I told you cracks come from water getting into the ground underneath and swelling it up, or soaking into the concrete itself and freezing? A sealer stops that water from ever getting in to begin with. It soaks down into the surface and blocks moisture from penetrating, instead of just sitting on top like a paint would. So while your patches fix the cracks you have got today, the sealer is what keeps new ones from starting next winter. Applying it is nothing complicated. Wait until your patches have fully cured, at least a week out, then sweep the whole driveway clean and let it dry completely. A full dry day with no rain in the forecast. Pour the sealer into a pump sprayer or a paint roller tray and lay it down in a thin, even coat, working in sections so you are not stepping in wet sealer to finish the next section. One coat is usually enough. Let it cure a full 24 hours before you drive or walk on it again. Do that once, and plan on doing it again every 2 or 3 years, and you will notice something. The driveways on this road that get resealed regularly are the ones that stay smooth for decades. The ones that never do are the ones somebody is out here patching new cracks in every spring. That $15 jug of sealer is doing more to protect your investment than any patch ever will, because a patch fixes what already broke, and the sealer is what stops the next one from happening at all. That's the whole bag of tricks. Take care of that driveway, and it will take care of you for a long, long time. So here is the whole of it, plain and short. Clean the crack out to solid concrete and undercut the edges so your patch has a shape to lock into. Wet the old concrete and brush on a thinned glue slurry before you patch, so the new material bonds instead of drying out too fast. Mix your patch stiff, pack it in firm from one end to the other, and finish it flush with the surrounding surface. Then give it 3 days, covered, and kept damp, because that patience is what makes the difference between a patch that holds and one that does not. For a wider gap or an expansion joint, back a rod and a flexible sealant instead of solid patch mix. And if you see the ground has genuinely shifted underneath, call it what it is and bring in someone qualified to look at the foundation itself. Do the whole job yourself on an ordinary crack, and you are looking at maybe $10, $15 in materials against $200, $300, $400 for a contractor to do the very same thing. There is no secret to any of it, no trade knowledge locked up behind a license. It is the same handful of steps that got done on farms like this one for more than 100 years before anybody thought to charge for it. If this saved you a call to a contractor, do me a favor and hit that like button, and subscribe if you have not already, because I have got a lot more of the old ways coming. And if you know somebody with a cracked driveway who has been putting off dealing with it, send them this video. It will save them some real money. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.